are continuing. This is the last week in the book of Judges. This is it. And listen, this is a long one too. I've tried. Every time I've gone through this sermon, I've tried to shorten it up. All right, and so just buckle in, because we're going through chapters 17 through 21, because I didn't want to do more than 1 week on this content. It's rough. It's rough. So, setting up kind of to where we are in the book of Judges. The book of Judges is right after Joshua, and it's kind of after the conquest of Canaan and all that, and it's kind of like just this cycle of just downwardness, much like a cycle of downwards, like a toilet bowl, just flushing everything out, right? Like that is kind of what's happening in the book of Judges, and this section, as we're going down and down and down, is the worst. I haven't really heard anyone in this service, but in the first service, there were two people. When we were originally going through this in Bible study, I remember, and you guys will probably remember this too, Mick came in, and it's the first time he's ever read Judges, and he read the end of it about halfway through class, and he's like, why are we even going through this book? This thing is terrible. Like, there's no good in it. There's like all these, like, just went on a whole like preaching tirade for a while, and the man can't even stand up for himself, and I'm talking about him in this service. But then a few weeks ago, another guy from the first service named Dwayne came up to me, he's like, I just read the end of Judges. Oh my goodness, it's awful. So I think you should read it. I just don't think you should read it as bedtime stories to your kids. Like it'll lead to weird questions. It'll lead to like just bad dreams and all that stuff, because it's heinous and it's awful. It really is. It was hard figuring out what readings to use for it, because there's so many heinous, awful things in the readings, and we're like, oh, how are we going to do this? So that's kind of what's going on. And so, and what we've seen is that there's been this progression downwards in the book of Judges. And what I find amazing is that all these big characters, like Samson, we talked about last week, I always grew up understanding that Samson was this mighty man of faith. No, Samson's the worst. Like, he's awful, right? And then Japheth right before him, and Gideon. Like, it's just this progression downward all the way till we get to now, and in this last section. And it just falls off the rail. So I'm going to attempt to give you the Cliff Notes version of this as fast as I can and still be interesting. You know, we got to throw in some flourishes in there. And to get to it, because what we're going to do today is we're actually going to read the last verse of the book, right? We're going to see what the context to this is, because this is what we've seen the Judges is pointing us to. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. We are now going to get and catch up to this verse, because this is just an utter mess. To describe what a big mess that it is, there's a guy there's a guy that has he's an Israelite, and he has idols that he's fashioned for his house, and he ends up meeting this Levite. And the Levite's another tribe of Israel, and they are the priestly class. They dress a lot like this, you know, kind of around and all that. Like they're the priestly class, and he's like, hey, Levite, it'd be great to have you here. I'd love to have you in my home. You can watch over my idols. And the Levite's like, that sounds great. I'd love to like to participate in the idolatry with you. I'd love it, right? Like, and over there he does that, and then this other tribe called the Danites end up coming up to this Levite, and they're like, man, you've been such a great Levite to this one guy. How about being a Levite and watch over our idols as well? And he's like, that sounds even better. And we see that they're using this priest. This priest doesn't even know God. Doesn't know what's going on here. And this first reading that I have for you is going to be like a lot of the readings that I have today. The way we often treat the book of Judges is we try to weasel our way through it. We're like, it wasn't that bad. which leads us into thinking that Samson is like this awesome man of God. Or that Gideon was not just a coward and selfish. Like that. That's all these things. We kind of weasel our way through the stories. This last few chapters of Judges makes sure that we can't do that. Because I think the author of Judges, by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, it is Pentecost, make sure that they know that we like to weasel our way through scriptures and wants beyond a shadow of doubt to know that you know what's going on. So here's the first one. It's what Coley read just a little bit ago. And there the Danites set up for themselves an idol. And Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Moses. This guy is Moses' grandson. And he's got idols in his house. So the first thing around there, it's like, oh man. Like some of you have been in the LCMS a long time. There's certain names of royalty in the LCMS. Escher is not a name of royalty. Like all this stuff. But Zinder, right? Like that's Kishnik. Like he's got these names of royalty. Some of you are looking at blank faces like that, but those of you who've been in here forever, like those are names of royalty. Moses is one of those names. This guy should not have idols, and he does. This is the point. It's starting to show you this is not someone else. It's coming from inside the house. The house is the problem. The people here are the problem. And so and the whole point of this is the reason why it's pointing out is it's saying, don't look away. Don't look away. Because when we're dealing with sin and hurts and pains, oftentimes our inclination is to look away. And we'll talk more about these in a little bit, but I think there's two different ways we do this. One of the ways we look away is just ignoring it, sweep it under the rug, or apparently we do this because every time I look underneath my couch, apparently we sweep all kinds of things underneath my couch. And it's like, oh, there's 4 pairs of socks underneath here, you know? Like that. That's all those things. We like to sweep it away. But the other way, we will snap and go the other way, that we won't look at it by physically getting rid of it. Get out of my presence. I can't stand you anymore. Both of those are looking away. But let's get into the story and talk about the heinous nature of the story. You guys ready? You buckled in? You got your buckles cinched and all that stuff? Seat and tray tables are in their upright positions? Because what goes on is there's another Levite. There's another Levite that comes into the area, and he has a wife and a concubine. And some of you are like, a concubine? What's a concubine? Well, it's like a second-class wife for pleasure. All right? So this Levite has a wife and a concubine, and he goes off for a couple months, and he's coming back home. And they, on the way back, it's asked, should we stop here? And the reason why this verse is here, this is, what is it, Judges chapter 19, verse 12? Because I want you to see here. He goes, no, we won't go into any city whose people are not Israelites. We will go on to Gibeah. Like you do. You go on to Gibeah. That's, the story is going out of its way so that you know what happens next happens in an Israelite town. It's Kathy's over here. This is awful. She knows the story. That's and it's going out of its way so that you know it's not happening in a Gentile area. It's happening with us, type of thing, right? And so what happens is they get on into there, and they're setting up camp inside this town, and someone from the town goes, no, don't do that out here. It's not safe. Come into my house. Stay with me. And so they stay in there, and once it gets dark, suddenly a mob of people come forward to the house and start banging on the doors. And they begin to send, they're like, send out that Levite. Send out everyone that's in your house as a guest. And the New King James renders it like this, so that we can be carnal with them. The ESV sanitizes it further and says, so that we can know them. The NIV, my favorite translation, BT Dubs, says, so that we can have sex with them. Right? No hiding this. Like that's, and you can't even hide from it. And what ends up happening is the host ends up sending out that concubine plus his young virgin daughter, and the mob of men do whatever they wish to them. Now, does this story sound familiar? It should. There's another story in Genesis that's just like it. Sounds like Sodom and Gomorrah. Sounds just like Sodom and Gomorrah. And I think it's interesting that we often, we get sodomy from Sodom and Gomorrah, that we'll often point to them as like, look how bad those people are. We need to do this. The same story happens and it's Israelite people, which this story is meant to be a mirror for us. It's supposed to be like us. This story never gets quoted. Like that's because it's us, It's so easy to blame other people for our problems. And so they treat the concubine like this. And the next morning, the Levite wakes up and he goes out the door, and this is the next verse. And this is a bad reading. So, when her master got up in the morning, he opened the door of the house and stepped out to continue on his way. And there lay his concubine, fallen on the doorway of the house with her hands on the threshold. And he says, "Get up, let's go." And there's no answer because she's dead. And the image of this rattles me to my core. Like when we were going through that Bible study, I could hardly handle this reading. Like the image of that woman clinging to the only place she knows there might be safety in the threshold of that door, and that's where she dies. Like it's disturbing. It's disturbing. And then he, realizing she's dead, he ends up cutting her body into 12 pieces, and he sends those pieces of the body to the 12 tribes of Israel, saying, "Look at what has happened." It's like it's like the most Game of Thrones thing you've ever heard, right? I've never watched that show though. I'm not that much of a sinner. Whatever, right? So it's the most like medieval thing, like where they're sending body parts to these other things. And this enrages the other tribes. This enrages them. They're like, I cannot believe that tribe of Benjamin would do something like that to ourselves. I cannot believe that this would happen. And they begin to rally the troops together. They begin to rally the other 11 tribes of Israel together to fight against the tribe of Benjamin. They rally everything going. Now, there's something that you have to remember here as we go into all of this. We call it the conquest of Canaan, is the biblical studies version of this story. And that's like Joshua in the Battle of Jericho, when Joshua, they cross over from the wilderness into the land flowing with milk and honey. And God said, destroy the Philistines, destroy all these things. And they have like a battle, and they're like, yeah, we destroyed them, right? Like they do all that. But the problem with those narratives, it says that they destroyed it, but those people kind of keep coming back up into the story. It's like, did you actually destroy them? Like, I don't think you did. I think Judges is getting into that. Because what they do to their own people, what they do to themselves, is disgusting. And it goes on a tirade in such detail about how they destroyed Benjamin. So I'm going to go through that. It's a few verses, like 4 different verses, something like that, maybe 5. And it says, then the Israelites counterattacked the Benjaminites, were terrified. And because they realized the disaster had come on them. So they fled before the Israelites in the direction of the wilderness, but they could not escape the battle. And the Israelites who came out of the towns cut them down there. They surrounded the Benjaminites, chased them and easily overran them in the vicinity of Gibeah on the east. 18,000 Benjamites fell, all of them valiant fighters, and they turned and fled towards the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and the Israelites cut down 5,000 men along the roads. They kept pressing after the Benjamites as far as Gittim and struck down 2,000 more. It keeps going. The men of Israel went back to Benjamin and put all the towns to the sword, including all the animals and everything else they found, all the towns they came across, they set on fire. There is a level of detail there that just isn't talked about when they're actually destroying their enemies. Am I right, retired pastor? The theologian? Like with the two theologians, I'm verifying what I'm saying right now. That's it goes into detail about how they were willing to destroy themselves over this. And it's disgusting. And once they do it, suddenly they realize what has happened. And they're like, oh no, we're in a bit of a pickle now. Because there's a couple of soldiers left, but they've destroyed all the women, the children, the livestock, the houses, the towns. They've destroyed everything. And they're like, there's a couple stories, but we've wiped off an entire tribe of Israel. And that's a big deal. The 12 tribes of Israel, we have 12 disciples, right? This is kind of God's number here. It's kind of the whole thing, representing God's people. And they're like, we've destroyed all of them. They need wives to procreate. But before the battle, all these people in the tribes of Israel made these macho vows saying, we will never give our daughters to marry Benjaminites. That we vow to never do that. And they're looking, they're like, they need wives to continue on. They're like, we shouldn't have done this. And so they find a loophole. Loopholes. They're great. When we're feeling selfish, we do them in our taxes, right? They find this loophole and they go, all right, when are young women? All right, let's talk about young women for a second. Mary, the mother of our Lord, was 14, 13, something like that, when she gave birth to Jesus. This is younger than that. When our young women go up to the place where the tabernacle is, in Shiloh, on that hill where we have this temple of God in tent form, where we have them, and they go and they dance around and basically worship the Lord our God who created the heavens and the earth. When they go to do that, we will allow these men of Benjamin to come and take the women there to be their wives. And when their fathers complain to us, we'll just go, well, we had to do something. We had to do something. In avenging one woman's raping and murder, along with everything else going on there, they ended up condoning and taking probably somewhat 600 young ladies, not to mention the thousands that lost their lives. And this is how the book of Judges ends. The last 3 verses. So that's what the Benjamites did. While the young women were dancing, each man caught one and carried her off to be his wife. Then they returned to their inheritance and rebuilt the towns and settled in them. At that time, the Israelites left that place and went home to their tribes and clans, each to his own inheritance. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That's how that book ends. Cheerful, right? You read it on Christmas morning to your family. It's awful. It's awful, right? Like it's just heinous. And you're just like, what is the purpose of this? This is disgusting. I don't know what to do with it. And I think it's telling us as each leader gets worse and worse and worse, as we started with Ehud, then went to Deborah, and then we went to Gideon, and then we went to Jephthah and Samson, and now we are here. I think it's telling us, don't look away. Because when they began to look away, when they thought the sin of the other person was greater than their own, it gave them full license to destroy whoever they wanted. And that's the point, because I think we do the same thing. And this book is like a mirror coming up to us that says, don't look away. Don't look away from the sin that's in your midst. Don't look away from any of those things, because I think there's like two different ways. I'm going to skip this for time. And there's two different ways that we look away. The one is that we just sweep it under the rug. We just ignore it. It's like, those are some nice idols you got in your house. Like, that's great. Like, that's I'm really glad you have that. The other way we do that is like, I don't like what's being taught in that church, that pastor with the long tassels and all that stuff. Like I'll just watch like these YouTube videos, or I'll just find something that agrees with me. I'll bounce around until I get something that I like. Type of thing like that. Like sometimes that's necessary, but we often see that. We'll sweep it under the rug, not think about it. Like or we just won't think about the sin that is around us. But as I say that, I know there's a certain group of people in this room that are like, that's right. We need to raise our banners against the sin that is amongst us. We need to go over there. We need to get rid of the terrible sin, like all that stuff. And they don't say it, but it's basically like, off with their heads. Get rid of them. I don't want to see them in my sight anymore. I don't agree with that lifestyle that they're leaving. That is not God pleasing. Send them out of our midst. Get them out of here. I don't want to see them anymore. Like, just get rid of them. You're dead to me now, right? Those are both ways that we look away. And this happens all the time. Like, this is how we treat our prisoners in this country. We're like, oh, you did something I don't like. Let's just put you away. I don't have to think about you. We can pay the nice people to deal with you. Like, get them out of our life. A great example of this is... So you guys remember the whole scandal, with the molestation scandal with the Catholic Church back, 25 years ago? Something like that. You guys all remember that. Well, did you know that happened also with the Southern Baptist Church in Texas? Just like 10 years ago? And what caused that, was that the churches there, and they're just trying to be faithful churches like this. I'm not blaming them, because they're us. It's these churches, something would happen with a youth leader or something like that. That they had done something with a child that they should not have done, and the church looked at it and like, oh my goodness, and they would just fire the person and send them along their way. And then you know what that person would do? They didn't actually deal with it, they just fired them. They would move. And they'd walk into another church and like, I have a history, I moved to the area, and I have a history of teaching kids. Will you hire me? And there was just a pattern of going through there. They never dealt with it. They're like, just get it out of my sight. Like, I don't want to deal with you anymore. And so they wouldn't deal with it. And listen, I'm not saying I'm any better at this. But Judges and the heinousness is telling us, don't look away. Don't look away. And at the end of Judges, it says, they had no king and they did whatever is right in their own eyes. But the good news is today is that we do have a king. We do have a king. And that king, King Jesus, God, who created the heavens and the earth, who set apart Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and created this found, who brought his people out of Egypt, out of slavery, and led them into where they are today, that king never stopped looking at his people. Even though they were being atrocious and awful and doing whatever is right in their own eyes, he never looked away from them, and he never looks away from you. Even those sins and hurts and pains that you, just like me, like to put away and hide, because we all know, like, I'm nice and squeaky clean and close to perfect, right? You guys all know this, right? I don't have anything that I try to hide, nothing. I'm just open book, right? Don't worry, my extrovertism hides a bunch. But all those places, those dark crevices that we know we don't want to see the light of day, we want to keep those things hidden, those sins that we even keep from our own spouses and families, stuff that we're ashamed of, all those things like that, the stuff that we don't want to see the light of day, God has eyes for them. And the good news is that even with that stuff, he still sees you. And he loves you. And he, in order to deal with all of those dark crevices and all those places where we have hurt other people around us and all this stuff, he comes to you. And he came to this world, not built in mansions and all these things, but he came born in a dirty, a crook of a stable, a manger, like worshipped by shepherds all through, and he was constantly at the low and the outcast, those that had leprosy, those that were blind. He constantly went to them. In his life, he constantly went down, 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 all the way to the point where he willingly went to the cross, which is so much darker, so much dingier, so much worse than any of the sins that you have ever committed, so that he could scoop underneath you and in his resurrection raise you up with him so that he can look at you straight in the eye, never averting his gaze, and go, "You are forgiven." That you're loved and that you're beloved, and that he went to all the muck and the mire so that you would know that God's gaze never comes off of you, even when you would like it to. Don't look away at your sin. It's how we damage ourselves. But God is the God of restoration and new creation. And he is always looking at you and saying, "You're loved and forgiven." And I think that's good news. And we'll end right there. I invite you to stand for a blessing. God, continue to bless and keep everyone here. That as we discuss difficult things and Judges and all that, Lord, but we see that you did the difficult work for us. That you love us beyond all measure. You love us beyond our sin, and that you always have eyes for us. Lord, may we have your eyes for our neighbors around us, that we may pronounce that same forgiveness. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. We'll sing our next song.